Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you're listening to this, and welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats. Producer JL coming at you by myself today, as a lot of the rest of the crew are either doing their own thing, taking a break, especially after this long Ranger season. I don't necessarily blame them. Anyways, so what's this all about? Well, first and foremost, I want to thank everyone over the last couple of months throughout the regular season and playoffs for not only taking a look at our coverage on Blue Seat Blogs, but also actually engaging with us on the podcast. You know, we love doing this, and the engagement just kind of makes it everything better. And you guys have certainly made my life a lot better. And I want to thank Dave, the crew, the rest of the folks who participate in the podcast, our contributing writers on the website, and to those who are paying attention, listening to my dumb content that I put out on Twitter, and also the articles and videos that I put together along with this podcast. We thank you. Um, so I wanted to do a reaction episode of some thoughts that I had. And then just an idea of something that I'm also going to put as an article on the website as well. But before I get into that, I just wanted to say that so we're not totally going away this summer, although we may not produce a podcast every week. We're going to try and experiment with some different types of formats and podcasts for you while the summer hangs along. Also, we'll have our normal podcast whenever big news breaks, whether they sign a free agent. We're definitely going to have a lot of draft coverage coming up in about a week or two. We're definitely going to have that going as well as we approach the NHL draft and the start of the new season. And we'll definitely have a free agent frenzy show. Definitely interesting to see what the Rangers will do. The cap's gone up. It's going to be a difference of about 4.5 million from what I was able to read. So the Rangers are definitely going to have their work cut out for them, and we'll have that coverage for you, and we'll be able to get you the best that we can offer you here on Live from the Blue Seats and on Blue Seat Blogs. Anyways, so to touch on something, just some thoughts about the season. So if you listened to the last podcast, it was known that I wasn't there. I am currently, as I record this, I had a bout with bronchitis. It was a sinus infection that ended up turning into something else, and I was actually in the hospital as I was producing it on my phone. That's the joy of StreamYard, is that if you have somewhat of an internet connection, I had my headphones with me, and I produced a podcast in a hospital bed. As you can tell, my voice isn't all the way there. You can hear me kind of trying to. There it is. I'm trying not to cough too much in your ears. So there may be some pauses, but I wanted to touch on this podcast because I'm on this topic rather, because I'm well enough to actually do it, and I really wanted to get my thoughts out there because it's been about a week and change, and I've certainly had enough time to think about the Rangers' exit in the playoffs against the Florida Panthers, and just kind of reacting to some of the things that I've seen on Twitter and things that I've seen people say. So, I definitely just wanted to get my thoughts on that. So, with that being said, I am terribly disappointed at how the season ended. You know, I echoed a lot of some of the, I was agreeing with a lot of the points that, Rob, Nick, and Dave were talking about. It was just, we had such a strong season, and just to kind of see it end the way that it did, it was definitely disappointing, and I was definitely upset. This time around, I was a little more numb than anger than anything. I kind of felt more anger when the Mets lost in the 2022 playoffs, and that was because that season was essentially a 101 win season, and it kind of fell flat because the Atlanta Braves somehow managed to have a historic run of games after the All-Star break. But, this time around, just watching the way the Panthers play, and the way that they go in heavy, it 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 just certainly just kind of showed the deficiency in sort of the team. I don't want to say mentality, but and then you also don't want to say that the other team wanted it more because that's usually kind of a cop out excuse. Um, the Panthers are just better. That's it. And I know Dave definitely reiterated this, and I'll say it again. The Rangers were good. The Panthers were just better. And that's evident by this Stanley Cup final right now. And I'm going to touch on the topic involving McDavid and Draisaitl in a bit because I think it relates to some of the players that the Rangers currently have right now. But no, it is a bummer. You spend almost 8 months just being emotionally invested in the team, and for good reason. It's fun. We watch this because we care. We watch this because we love the game, and that we really, we just kind of really care about the team, and we enjoy it. This is why we watch it. It's because we enjoy it. I'm not going to sit here and validate anybody's feelings or whatever, but we get, even though people don't want to hear it, we get this chance to do it again in a couple of months. Now, in terms of the roster, you know, um, the team definitely needs to work on uh, D zone exits and just kind of finding a better way to get out of the zone. Um, that was one of the big things, guys like Truba and Gustafson, especially. And even Schneider and Miller to a degree, they were just the forecheck done by the Panthers was just too much. And you could even see it right now. As I record this, it's Edmonton, Florida. Florida leading 2-0, and they're up by 1 with about a minute 30. So that just gives you a time frame of when I'm recording this. You could even see how they're doing it against Edmonton and doing it against two of the best players in the world. Where they're strong forecheck is just bearing them down into the zone and forcing them to make turnovers, which in turn ends up giving the Panthers the lead. Um, you know, this team's roster currently constructed, if they play anybody else, they probably make it to the final. But you're not going to get that kind of luck every time. And it's somehow you manage to face the Panthers again at some point, you're going to need to find a way to fight fire with fire. I was more or less disappointed on the fact that it just kind of seemed like even though they may have adjusted, they just didn't have much of an answer to the suffocating nature of the Panthers' forecheck. And then added to that, they're one of the best defensive teams in the league. Um, I guess you could probably say I'm still trying to process it. Um, it still hasn't hit me yet. I don't know if it'll really truly hit me. Because it was such a good season, but it just the way that it ended, it just kind of made me so numb. Um, Going back to the roster though, and I apologize if I'm bouncing around a little bit. I'm just trying to make sure I can, collect my thoughts properly. Um, the roster as currently constructed definitely needs some tweaking. They say that the Panthers play a very heavy game, and you wonder, well, why can't the Rangers do that? Well, they can, but they just need the right personnel for it. And that's not to say that, they need bigger guys because, Matt Rempe is one of the biggest people of all, but it's more of just the style of play individually from the player. They need to, kind of dig in a little more, use their body a little more, um, kind of cause havoc, so to speak, kind of like what Barkov does. Barkov is essentially the same size as Mika Zibanejad, but yet he's considered, a heavy player. Again, that's just the type of player there is. So, in terms of the roster construction, I think they just need a couple of quick adjustments. Um, Nothing too drastic. A lot of people are advocating for Jacob Trouba not being here. Ideally, that would be the case. You get rid of that $8 million contract, and you can have some cap flexibility, either on the forward side or you can kind of reinforce the back end. Because realistically speaking, the ideal moves is to get rid of Trouba, get rid of Lindgren, pair Miller with Fox, put Schneider and Jones, and then kind of fill out the rest with either a prospect or, a veteran who can, who is good in their own zone and is defensively responsible. So maybe like a guy like a Chad Ruedel, for example. But realistically speaking, more than likely, most of those guys on the defensive end are coming back. On the forward side, Mika Zibanejad, Chris Kreider, Artemi Panarin, were, they could have done more, but again, just the Panthers defense was absolutely ridiculous. Um, it if the Rangers can fill out the bottom six with players like, let's say, a Stefan Nason, Jordan Martinook, or similar to what Florida has in, you know, their depth, then they don't really have to have much of a big overhaul. Because one of the big things that the Rangers could have had an advantage over was the secondary scoring. But they didn't. The Panthers, they're big guys. They scored when they needed to score, but they weren't lighting up the lamp. I mean, Barkov wasn't scoring at a crazy clip. You know, you had guys like Bennett and Reinhart doing the job. You had guys like Evan Rodriguez. You had, a lot of those lower tier guys coming through. And while the Rangers' depth was really good, there was a hint of a lack of a scoring touch. As much as I think Alexander Wenberg was a solid addition, he is more than, and Rob has reiterated this on many occasions, is that he's a he's a 4C. And it was good to have him as a third center just for the fact that, you can get through the regular season, even the first couple of rounds with a guy like that. But then where does the scoring responsibility go to? Will Cooley, yeah, he's still growing his game. And then Capo Caco just, while he was good with possessions, seemed a bit lost. That's why I didn't necessarily mind the line changes that Laviolette had in game 6, because it kind of, actually that was probably the best they looked in a bit with those line pairs. But then you got Philip Hedl coming back, who can potentially give you that. But some offseason additions to the forwards, could probably, remedy that problem. Now, the main thing I wanted to talk about, and this is going to be an article that I want to put out soon enough, is the case of defending Mika Zibanejad, Chris Kreider, and to an extent Artemi Panarin. Now, all those guys were playing reasonably well going into the Carolina series, or even through the Carolina series, even towards the end. I mean, Mika Zibanejad was up there in points. Vincent Trocheck, Chris Kreider, even Artemi Panarin. Artemi Panarin got an overtime goal, overtime winner, for goodness sake. That Lafreniere, Trocheck, Panarin line was one of the best they had. And then you ended up getting secondary scoring from guys like Barclay Goodrow. And, Will Cooley had netted a couple of goals. And, um, it was different, So we know that these guys can score in the playoffs. Mika Zibanejad, granted, a lot of his work was done on the power play, was still very noticeable. Chris Kreider, he had the hat trick against Carolina to win, to basically win the series. So it's not a case of these guys can't perform in the playoffs. They just ran into a buzzsaw team in the Florida Panthers, who, as I'm recording this now, are up 3-0 against the Edmonton Oilers. Now, excuse me. Now, can you make the argument that Mika Zibanejad, depending on how he goes next year, excuse me, sorry about that. I didn't want to keep coughing in your ear. That Mika Zibanejad, he is not a 2C anymore, or 1C rather. That's a very fair argument. I don't, just judging off of the way that he's played this year, excuse me, I think there needs to be a reevaluation. And Rob had alluded to this in the last episode. There needs to be a reevaluation of his role, because you're paying him all this money and he's kind of vanishing a little bit. Great defensively, but offense is nowhere to be found. That being said, I'm not going to totally write the guy off. One of the mistakes I make about going on Twitter is really reading the comments, but, keeps me in tune. And people were, rightly so, there was some very fair criticism of his game. And, he could have been injured. It wasn't the same after the Brent Burns cross check to the back. So it could have been maybe a lower back injury, a rib injury. Sometimes we don't get the injury reports willingly from the teams. So who knows? But clearly after that incident, he wasn't the same after that. But you take a look at the Stanley Cup final right now, and the Florida Panthers have essentially kept McDavid and Draisaitl and the rest of those their players basically off the board, and they're up 3-0 in the series right now. So granted, and then let's go to Chris Kreider. Chris Kreider, who is a net front presence, is able to crash the net, was essentially a misnomer. Like, he was nothing really. But again, the Florida Panthers play a very suffocating style of game. So, and then to just mention Artemi Panarin. Panarin scored 120 points in the regular season and was actually still a very productive playoff player. And a lot of the narrative right before the Panthers series was essentially that Panarin had pretty much gotten past the hump. And he did have a very good postseason for this team. Out of those three forwards, Panarin, Kreider, and Zibanejad, Panarin was probably the most productive in the Eastern Conference Final. Granted, he only had the one goal, if I remember correctly, but he still put up assists. Alexis Lafreniere and Vincent Trocheck were there to assist Lafreniere's breakout. And it takes a line, and I think Panarin was very productive. So I think the assessment on Panarin is really unfair. And I'm not going to fault anyone, I'm not going to fault anyone for feeling that way. There's, they lost the Eastern Conference Final when it was basically told to us that we were going to go to the Stanley Cup. I get it. I'm a fan too. I'm upset. But after a bit, you kind of have to start thinking logically when it comes to next season and say to yourself, well, like, look at the Tampa Bay Lightning, for example. When they got swept in the first round by the Columbus Blue Jackets, they kept a lot of that team together. They just didn't, like the main guys, Kucherov, Stamkos, Victor Hedman, Braden Point, they kept all those guys together. What they did was they supplemented the back end to complement the stuff that those players tend to miss. But then in turn, those players ended up turning on another gear. So the hope is that if those guys are going to come back, which I'm more than likely going to say that they are, because they're not going to trade Panarin after 120 points. They're not going to trade Chris Kreider at his, easy contract, and also the fact that he's more than likely going to stay a Ranger for the rest of his life. And Mika Zibanejad, they're not going to move him. All these guys have these clauses in their contracts, and even Jacob Trouba. I know a lot of people don't want him gone. I wouldn't be opposed to him leaving, even though he's one of my favorite players. He, if he goes, that frees up space for the Rangers to use. But if they don't let him go, and he does stick around next season, they have to find a way to utilize his skill set. But this team can still be salvaged, though, is the point I'm trying to make. On the defensive end, like I said, if you somehow decide to keep Jacob Trouba, get him a defenseman who can move the puck, utilize Jones, Schneider, Fox, and Miller more, and then just kind of go from there. This team is still a very talented team. The President's Trophy, granted, it's not the best. You can't just disregard that. So they just need to find players who can dig a little bit deeper on the bottom end and who can also score. Now, who were those players going to be? Well, we'll have that more in depth as we go throughout the summer. But to kind of just throw away Kreider, Zibanejad, and Panarin, who knows? Maybe this summer, Mika Zibanejad, I don't want to say works on his game because of that infamous tweet, but if Mika Zibanejad finds a way to kind of hit that next level and really take it, and he's the one out of all the players that I was shocked that didn't have a good Eastern Conference Final, because he was probably one of our better forwards in 22. And then he just 23 was vanished. And then this year he just kind of vanished in the Panthers series. So, you don't want to give up on them yet. You still have like maybe 1 or 2 years left of this group, but Chris Drury has to supplement. You have to add some grit. I don't want to say moxie, but just kind of build similar into the vein of the Florida Panthers. So I'm gonna have a corresponding article to this soon enough. Um, but those are just my thoughts, really. I know it probably sounded a bit scatterbrained, but I just wanted to get that out there. And basically just kind of say that I understand the frustrations of a lot of people. We're fans, we pay money to go see this team. A lot of us have been waiting for a bit. I'm probably one I was probably one of the ones that was probably the most upset in the moment. I could say that for myself. At least I was really mad. I was driving home most of that game, coming back from a Mets game, so I had it on in my car, and I was very disappointed. I thought that they were going to come out. They played well defensively, and then when I came home and watched the rest of the game, it just kind of that's it. Season's over. That sucks. A lot of us have been fans of this team past 1994. I'm 31 years old. I I I did I was barely conscious when the Rangers won the Stanley Cup in 1994. I wasn't even alive when the Mets won the World Series in 1986. I was -7, you know? So a lot of us, that frustration comes in just from the constant years of there. And here's another thing too that I'll add. Will Chris Drury finally be able to add to this team that the previous regime did not? Because that's one of the big reasons why a lot of the fans are jaded. We made it to the playoffs, I think 11 out of 12 years. Excuse me. And we had Henrik Lundqvist basically carrying some really, really bad teams into long playoff runs. And when we got to the point that we wanted to get to in 2014, we got stabbed in the back by the officials. Everything you name it happened against us, whatever you want to call it. And it just turned out to be, disappointing. 2014 hit, a lot of us really hard. So a lot of us have that sort of kind of annoyance. It's like, well, we're going to do the same thing to Igor. And again, that is a very valid concern. But the thing I'll say is this, is that I think this group has a better shot than those previous groups, because not only do we have a Stanley Cup, caliber goaltender in Igor Shesterkin, but the overall skill that these guys have far supersedes whatever we had back then. And it's not to knock those guys, because they certainly did put in the work. It was a very workmanlike team, but it's very rare that you see a workmanlike team win a Stanley Cup without skill. And maybe this process for the Rangers is going to be different than most. There is a lot of skill coming up. There's a lot of skill currently, and there's also a lot of grit coming along too. So while unfortunately it didn't happen last season, maybe it happens in the next year or two. Who knows? But the potential is there, and that's one of my saving graces to me personally. You can think anything different, but my saving grace is that, judging off of the Rangers' track record of drafting over the last couple of years, it seems like what's missing from the team is coming up in the pipeline. That kind of in your face, heavy skill sort of game with guys like Will Cooley, even Matt Rempe to a degree on the fourth line. Adam Sikora, who is one of my personal favorites, who I think if he rounds out well enough, he's going to be a force for this team. And then you have Brennan Othman. The guy is in your face. The guy seems to kind of have a bit of an edge to his game. We've gone through Othman extensively on this blog and on this podcast, and maybe this is the time for those guys to come up. Maybe this is Othman's time to come through and be that guy for Mika and Kreider, you know, or or maybe Adam Sikora comes in, and even Brett Berard. I forgot to mention him too. Brett Berard is another guy who seemed to kind of have been sort of a glue guy with some skill and a chip on his shoulder in Hartford. So maybe those guys are the ones that kind of come in and fill the gap and allow the Rangers to kind of build elsewhere while not blowing their load on one side. Maybe having those guys in can end up allowing the Rangers to sign Igor to a decent contract. Cap's going to go up, so market rates for goaltenders are definitely going to go up. I mean, the goaltender currently right now for the Florida Panthers is making 10 plus million, I think, if I'm correct. So if the cap continues to go up and these prospects that come up are able to fill the role that the Rangers need, I think they're going to be fine. This organization has finally decided to go the route and actually draft skill with potential than just getting skill with a ceiling. And I think in relation to this core, I said this in the chat, maybe it's going to be a mix of both. Maybe Capo Caco won't be here. Maybe another big part of the core won't be here. It'll be a mix of the two. This team still has a very big window. These guys are not that old yet. These guys still have a lot of miles left in them, you know, and it's only up to Chris Drury and management to supplement that skill and give the team what they really need. Anyways, I don't want to waste any more of your time. But if you decided to sit down and listen to this, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And we here at Live from the Blue Seats really do appreciate your listening, and we appreciate your click. That's it for me here tonight. Like I said before at the beginning, we're going to have a couple of different types of episodes, whether it's like audio episodes about certain players, maybe some sort of trivia, something to kind of, keep everything going throughout the summer. And we'll also have, obviously, draft day coverage, probably get someone from the blog to come on and talk about some other prospects. And then we'll probably go into any other big moves the Rangers make, and then also free agent frenzy. So we're not going away. We'll still be here. And we thank you for your time. We thank you for your listen. My name is producer JL. And for everyone here at Live from the Blue Seats, let's go Rangers.